The nice thing about airport bonds as a whole is they've been very favorable. I know last time we went out, we were oversubscribed quite substantially. We would expect the same thing to happen now.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back, 2026 edition, season whatever, what is this,
Season 3? 4? Season 4. Yeah,
4.
I know, 4.
Wow. How old are you?
Too old.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm Courtney Miller, still, of Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavon of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
Today we are talking to actually a good friend of mine, Stephen Hennigan. Stephen he's currently Executive Director and CEO for Lee County Port Authority. So basically he runs the Fort Myers Airport area. Prior to that, he was Deputy Executive Director of Aviation and COO for Lee County Port Authority as well. He was Assistant GM and Chief of Operations for Houston Airport, the Assistant Aviation Operations Manager and Aviations Operations Manager for Denver. Prior to that, he had a stint at FedEx for a little while in operations. He's got a BS in Aviation Business Administration from Embry-Riddle, just like me. And he also is a AAAE certified employee in operations and security. So, little heads up, Steve and I went to school together at Embry-Riddle in Prescott, Arizona. So I've known him for a long time. It's going to be, I think it's over 30 years now. But great guy, and it'll be really cool to get his take on kind of what airports do these days, right? How to look at things. We haven't had somebody like that, so that's going to be cool. So, Steve, this is your time on wing. So, before we get on with our guest, which you guys are going to absolutely love, we obviously, first of all, we want to thank all our listeners for listening to us and making the show what it is today. And we certainly welcome any of you to, whenever you see us at conferences, just please say hello. And we'd love to hear that you guys are listening and fans of the show. As you all know, we do run businesses. And so from my end at Collateral Verifications, on the appraisal side, right, obviously if you have any needs when it comes to aircraft, engine, landing gear, you name it, right, just please feel free to reach out. I'm very approachable. I'm happy to chat about any kind of projects, and we'd love to work with you on a variety of things. We do have some publications out there as well. I do Turbine Aircraft Guide, Turboprop Value Guide. I've got the Aircraft Rating Tool. So there's various publications that we put together that can kind of help you on your day-to-day. Great reference points. So definitely, kind of reach out to us, and we'd love to chat and kind of start that relationship with you.
Okay, back to the show. A quick disclaimer for all podcasts before we start. The opinions you're going to hear expressed today are personal, and those of Garrick, myself, the guest, shouldn't be relied on as fact or as professional advice. This applies specifically to any mentions of public companies and matters not in the public domain. We haven't verified every statement, so please treat this as the candid conversation that it is.
Thanks for being on the podcast. It's great to have you on, and we've known each other for a long time. As we do with all of our guests, we always love to hear kind of where aviation, where the interest came from, where the passion came from. You've obviously been doing stuff in aviation for all your career, so it's got to come from somewhere. But so we'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts there, your stories, and then we'll go from there. So I'll let you take it.
Yeah, thanks, Garrick. I think for the record, it's 33-ish years that you've had the pleasure of knowing me.
I know, 33.
I know. 33. That's a long time.
It's a long time.
Especially since we're only 40. So for me, growing up in Northern California, when we moved out to Northern California, my dad had the military as some of his clients, and Travis Air Force Base was one of his clients. And I used to go and watch the C-5s take off, and you'd see them out and about, flying over the house. And in closer to San Francisco in Alameda, there was a Naval Air Station, Alameda Naval Air Station. You'd see the old Navy, F-14s and Tomcats flying around. So there's a lot of aviation, a lot of military aviation growing up where I was, and it was always one of those things. Looking up, it's kind of in your blood from a young age, and luckily enough, I was able to follow that dream of going and flying, and took that and went to Embry-Riddle in Prescott, Arizona, which is where I met Garrick. What I look at your test, or you looked at mine, something like that. I don't know how that.
Something like that.
worked.
Yep.
It was a collaborative, collegial effort.
Yeah. Be like, do you know anything? No, I don't know anything either. We should.
All right, perfect.
So much sense.
Yeah, we should study together since we both don't know anything.
Don't know anything. It worked though. I think it worked out. It worked out well on both of our accounts.
Yeah.
No, but from there, went to Embry-Riddle. I actually started working at United Airlines in summers and Christmas vacations out in Oakland, just to get my foot in the door. Worked for FedEx. I ended up working for FedEx right after college. Spent about 8 years there, but I started in sales and got that itch to fly. So I went back and actually finished up my commercial ratings, commercial single and multi. Was supposed to finish right before, or actually the week of 9/11. And then obviously 9/11 hit and everything kind of came to a standstill from a flying standpoint. Luckily I was with FedEx, but that kind of put a damper on my future goals of flying airplanes for the majors. At that point I'd been with FedEx probably 3 or 4 years, and 3 or 4 years with somebody flying for a regional at the time, put somebody in a different position than just trying to get their foot in the door and flight instructing. So I did a little bit of a pivot, and got into airports, and my first airport was out in Denver.
What? So sales at FedEx, is that like what does a sales guy at FedEx
What is a sales guy? That's a great question. Sales guy at FedEx, everybody. So if you own a company and you ship something, I'm gonna visit you and try and get your business away from back then you had companies that you don't hear a lot of anymore because they might not exist. Airborne, you had DHL, UPS,
worked there.
and FedEx were the biggies. Airborne's not around. DHL is primarily back in Europe, and you have FedEx and UPS to some degree now. But I was knocking on doors. I had a lot against that, back to that military. A lot of military would ship a lot of stuff via FedEx. A lot of commodities. Those planes fill up with a lot of different things. Some of it mail, but you'd be going store to store saying, "Hello, how are you? Ship with us. Here's some better pricing than you would see with UPS."
Very cool. And this is we'll give you later pickup times or earlier drop-off times or all that type of thing.
Yeah, a lot of it was just pricing, volume pricing. So if what would be a good example? So wine, had a lot of wine out where I was in the Central Valley. So if you want to ship your wine, a lot of wine clubs. Instead of doing it via ground, you can do it via air or both. When I was there, we had bought a ground company to compete with UPS, but you would go in there and compete for pricing. A lot of hazmat companies if you're doing chemicals. A lot of pharmaceuticals shipping. They have dry ice is a hazardous material, so they'd be utilizing our service in special containers. So there's actually, when you figure how much stuff before Amazon was around, how much stuff really was point to point and how did it get there? It was a lot of those mom and pop type of stores. Before the internet age, there was this thing, it was called mail order. So you used to have mail that would come in your mailbox and you'd order something. So that's how they would get it to you.
Catalogs.
That's right. Yeah, catalogs, mail order. Yes, that's a different connotation.
I still get those, but I don't order anything from them.
Yeah,
so,
I know. But,
right?
I think it's interesting how everything's evolved from those catalogs and the mail order stuff, to now you get the Amazon Christmas catalog and it tells you how to order it online. So
yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of what we talk about in this podcast are more on the aircraft side, and the idea of cargo. And I know I know this was like ages ago, but it definitely piques interest because we haven't talked much about how the express cargo business actually kind of works. We tend to think of it as, an airplane has a big hole in the side of it and square boxes going around airplane. But the actual movement, the business case is always fascinating. But I am literally regressing back decades. In the context of all that, your shift to Denver Airport, what was that role?
So that role, I started out in the airport communication center. At 8 years at FedEx, said, what's the first job that can get me? We like Denver. My wife was fiancée at the time. We like the mountains. So what gets us out of the .com boom of Northern California and into a place that's a little bit more affordable to live? And the airport communications center was my first job at Denver International Airport. So I went there I interviewed on a Friday. I moved in with my wife on a Saturday, got the job on Monday, and two weeks later I was in Colorado and she was in California. So that was a quick one.
You moved in 2 days before you got the job offer?
Yeah. So we were going through all the wedding planning.
Good interview.
I was like, sorry. Yeah, she's a teacher, so it was one of those you got a date to get a new job someplace else, or I'm here for the school year. Sure. So I missed it by a weekend. But kind of the rest is history.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Now, and how long were you with Denver?
I was with Denver for about 8 years as well. Seems for some reason 8 and 8 is kind of my magical number. But no, Denver was held quite a few different roles there. I started in the communications center, which is kind of your hub for information coming in and out. We did police and fire dispatch. You had all the security, all the regulated doors. You had the general operational pulse of what's going on at the airport through some of those communication channels. Went up and became a supervisor of the communication center. And then I promoted up to airfield. And Denver is one of the unique airports where if you're on doing airside operations, you're also doing ramp control. So part of your checkoff is controlling aircraft up in the ramp tower. So did that, promote up to airport ops manager. But during that whole evolution, there was stints in emergency management, airport security for special projects, doing some procedural updates and guidelines, and so it was some snow removal. A lot of snow removal. We had the blizzard of, I guess, Dayton is, what was it, 2006, I guess it was, where the airport closed down and got foots of snow. Fun fact is, somewhere on a NOTAM has my initials to close the Denver International Airport. So,
that's cool.
If you see SH, that's me. I don't know if that's a great claim to fame, but
it's one. Why not?
Yeah.
Foot of snow. Yeah.
Multiple foot of snow in Denver, which happens.
Yeah. Very cool. So in terms of I'm still curious in terms of what made you think about, for the airport side, right? I mean, because you could have probably gone to work for an airline, even if not as a pilot or an operation. What drove you to be like, hey, you know what? Let me go check out the airport stuff. Was it just random that this position was open, or was it like, you know what? No, actually, I wouldn't mind being where everything happens.
Sorry, radio's on. Without naming an airline, I was the airlines post 9/11 had it was not it was World, TWA, none of those. No, they had a management training program. So you'd go in and you'd start maybe in finance, and they just roll you through everything. So I applied to that airline's management training program, and I got a call, said, hey, we'd like to fly you down to LA to interview. I said, I would love to come to LA to interview. And she said, you would? Kind of shocked. So I said yes, and then hung up the phone and got to thinking, why would the HR person be surprised that somebody would say yes to an interview with an airline post 9/11? So I conferred with my father, and it just struck me as odd. And then he said something very apropos: is you always need someplace to land, and you always need gas. So that kind of led me to looking more into the airports than the airline. But I think that phone call and that opportunity was really a catalyst for my moment of time not going back into the airline, because again, I'd worked for United. I guess it was just post their ESOP, the employee stock option program that they did in the late, I guess, early 90s. So that was a different airline than post 9/11, which I almost gave the airline name. It was very different, the airlines as a whole after that. So that's kind of how I ended up at airports. It was just an odd time in the industry, and airports were hiring.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. So nice.
Okay, so you go into communications. When you say communications, the first thing that comes to my mind is like PR, but that wasn't it, right? It was no. The nerve center of the communications between the various groups operating at the airport. Is that right?
Yeah. So you're sitting in a dark room with those old 6x6 computer TV things. You got a
green lettering.
Green. Yeah. Honest
Did
to
you
God.
See the Matrix? Could you
I did.
after a while?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. It was funny. So when you're in a dark room, well, you're in a room, but it's dark, and there's a hallway around it. You can see outside. But you're computerized. You got your headset on that you can talk, and you're kind of tethered in. And there was a dot matrix printer that had no paper in it, and it had no the print thing, but it would make the noise.
Yeah.
And I says, well, why do we have that? It says, oh, that's how you know when an alarm goes off. I said, but we're automated, and it shows you on your computer screen. So it was one of those weird times where you had some of the old school people going by tone, and every time the computer monitor would go off, you would see an alarm. You'd have to go over and read it, and then they transitioned that to the computer screen when you'd have a camera and voice and all kinds of other things setting up in front of you. But yeah, very much so. You're in a room with different areas. You might be dispatching police or fire. Again, you had the terminal operations, the airside operations. Maintenance was in a different side of the facility on the other side of the room, but it was very much the nerve center for all things going on at the airport.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by this. So the dot matrix printer with no paper, key.
No paper.
I hope you did not keep ink in it.
No.
And the
exactly, that's the one.
That was used for the sound. Like
it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine, right?
The nasty byproduct. The bug was the feature.
Yes. Yeah,
that's
hilarious. Yeah, because you figure you have the old school folks who, that was their safe space, because every time it would go zzz, you'd get up and you'd read what was going on, and you'd make a radio call. But, for I guess the people who used to sleep on the midnight shift, that's what would wake them up and, look at the computer screen and see what was going on.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I think that's an interesting evolution of how technologies evolved, but the people around them may not have necessarily evolved with the technologies.
Yeah, that's okay. I asked the kids what the save icon was on like a document on a computer, which is the old 3/4 disk. And they said that's the save icon. Well, what's it a picture of saving? Like on what? What's it a picture of? No idea. No, nothing. But they know exactly what it does. And I feel old.
Yeah, I know. That's what makes us feel old. I know. So then what took you from, you were at Denver for about 8 years, right? And then Houston, was that, I'm trying to think, did you move to Houston? Was that around the time where you were also looking at New York? Or was right?
Yeah.
So I remember.
Yes.
Yeah,
there was that. There was actually a couple different things. So with me being at at FedEx for those 8 years. When I went to Denver, I was actually working with a couple people that Garrick and I graduated with from Embry-Riddle. So they're 8 years into their tenure. And you're looking around going, I'm never going to pass these people here. I have to move someplace else to be able to do that. And luckily, I got a break. I became the assistant general manager for operations at George Bush Intercontinental IH.
Assistant general manager or assistant to the general manager?
Assistant general manager. So
wow, well done.
Yeah. So they had the general manager and then the assistant general manager. There was three of us. One that handled maintenance, one that handled security, and then operationally we handled everything. So that was just a promotional opportunity. Really is what it came down to, and that was quite a different experience from Denver, going from snow to hurricanes. Yeah, going from one airport to 3 airports because it was also hobby, as well as Ellington Airfield, which is where NASA was out of. So all the blue and whites NASA airplanes would launch out there. They also had military there. So it was very eclectic group of airports between the three, a large, a medium, and a GA joint use military airport. NASA right out your back door.
Yeah, that's got to be cool. I mean, I'm sure you probably saw some cool stuff coming in and out of there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting. We'd get, it's kind of sad that big Antonov that was blown up right at the start of the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
That one was stationed out of Houston for quite some time. They actually had Denver had a base there, so you would have them in and out quite frequently, just with all the oil stuff coming through Houston. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's between that and all the things that NASA has going on, everything in between it's quite a lot of things to see out there.
So, interested, general manager, assistant general manager, all the managers of general. What I'm really interested in is what do they do, right? So, like, lots
of big titles, but what do you do?
Well, my questions are, okay, of all the different tasks and responsibilities that you have from the airport side, which is not something that we think about often because it just kind of works, right? A good airport is one you probably don't think about because it's working. But of all the tasks and responsibilities, where does most of the time lie? What's the hardest? I guess maybe start from what are the responsibilities and what keeps you up at night?
So in my current role, I think everyone has been vastly different. Now it's really a lot more strategy, long-term planning. I have a good staff that does the day-to-day, but it's figuring out the pieces to the puzzle. And we are in the middle of about a $1.5 billion capital program. Next week we'll be going for $850 million in bonds, on top of about the $500 million that we went for about a year and a half ago. Our capital improvement program. How are we going to look and feel in 2, 3, 5 years? What are we doing staffing? Doing a 5-year staffing plan. With growth comes a new way of operating. We're doing about 11 million passengers a year right now. We're adding, we have 27 gates, so we're adding 14. So are you growing by a third or are you growing by a half? I guess it's just kind of depends on how you fuzzy math that one. So with those additional 14 gates, how many people do I need? What systems do I need? What supplies do I need? Do I need people? Do I need process? Or do I need both? Concessions, what's our concession mix look like? If you put too much of something in a certain area, then you dilute your potential revenue overall. How does that factor in with lounges? So it's a varied, mixed bag of things, part development, part property, part concession, part operational. But the neat part is, from a planning process, how do you plan to put all those pieces together while at the end of the day still maintaining and enhancing your guest experience? Because all of those things are to be self-sustaining, but if you can't self-sustain and bring your people through, then you're kind of defeating the purpose, because you want to be able to maximize those folks coming through. And I think the neat thing about this airport is there's a real sense of place. That you are in Southwest Florida when you come here. It's known for its cleanliness. It's airy. It's easy to get to the curb. It's easy to get to and from the freeway. So you want to maintain those things as you grow. So that's kind of the challenge that I work with, day in and day out.
What you mentioned a lot of, so like adding 14 gates towards 27 gate airport, I would assume is a long planning and execution process. What are kind of the timeframes that you're dealing with when you're doing? I guess what kind of timeframes are you dealing with in general with these projects that you call strategic as opposed to kind of the operations side?
Your years. So now, I'll give you an example. We our runway is 20 years old. No, let me rephrase that. The last time the runway was redone was about 20 years ago. So
that's because I left a couple divots in it last time I was there. Sorry.
Hard landings will do that to you. But we need to redo the asphalt, and we've only got a grand total of one runway here. So you got to start, meeting with the FAA, which we started 2 years ago, to get the approval to do it the exact same way we did it 20 years ago, which is using an adjacent taxiway as your runway. Swap it out. It meets the protocols. But 2 years to get them to do that, and now they just approve that, because if they don't approve it, you don't get the grants. So now we'll spend the next 18 months to design it, even though it was designed before. Design rules have changed. So that's at 3.5, almost 4 years, and then 2 years. So you've got about a 6-7 year evolution from start to finish. So we're doing a parking garage. Same kind of scenario. It's a multi-year evolution, because if you want to get the grants, you got to get in line. You got to subscribe to PFCs, or are you oversubscribed? How is that? How are those being utilized? So nothing is quick. This last few years have been a challenge. We're going through our checkpoint expansion. Some of our funding allocations have changed just because federal budgets have changed. So, you have to be ready for those and plan accordingly. But it's a long lead time. When you say you do a 5-year CIP, you do, but that 5-year outlook also has, a lot of planning with it as well.
If you're redoing runways every 20 years or so, right, give or take, how do you take into account what future services you may or may not want to get into the airport? And does that play a role in terms of like aircraft size? Like, does, because I'm sure you probably have to build certain runways to be able to handle, certain aircraft type, whether they're smaller or bigger, or if you're doing international service and you're getting, 777-9 that may come in later or not. Like, does all that play a role? And how do you take that into account to be able to put something that's going to last for the next 20 years of whatever you think you might want?
So right now it's our runway is 12,000 feet when we're at sea level. All of our concourses are designed, so all of our existing concourses are Group 4 aircraft design group, which doesn't really, by and large, there's nothing new being built in the Group 4, which was the old 767s type aircraft. Everything is Group 3 or Group 5, or the Air 380 is a 6. So from a size standpoint, we're gonna design to the largest and greatest. One of the things that's kind of cool about this airport is the 777X actually has been out here several times. They come out. Boeing has brought it out and spent months doing testing out here with the winglets that fold. I guess not winglets, but the whole wing that folds up.
Yeah.
So for us, our constraint is more the one runway than it is, stuff coming in, because we have a lot of diversions. Florida is kind of a curious state, if you will. Once you get up in the air, you're 20 minutes from Fort Lauderdale, 20 minutes from Orlando, 20 minutes from Miami, 15 minutes from Tampa. So when you get the diversions, we get everything but the 380s in here. So for us, it's not as much designing for size, because we're 12,000 by, I think, 200, standard big airport size. It comes down to more so what are our constraints once you hit the terminal side of it. So
okay.
So the runway, 20 years. The replacement cycle is, I'm guessing, probably 23 to 25. Is that about standard?
Well, you're saying how long it? Yeah, about that. So it's about 20 years old. So by the time it gets redone, it'll be about 25.
25, and you're describing a 6-year planning lead time. Is that, when you started, did you know it was going to be that long, or do projects get pushed more often, or are you able to kind of pull them forward and plan?
Yes. So you have a design.
That's a very appropriate answer.
Yeah. So it's both. So with a project, that, okay, we're coming up on 20 years, and based on our condition of the pavement, you have X amount of years left. Let's say 5 years left. So if we know we got 5 years, or 7 years, whatever that number might be, we need to start. If the target is that 5-year window, it might take a year to get FAA approval. It might take 2 years. So that just means that your target start date, you put it out far enough that it hits it. And if you can start early and get funding early, you start it. If not, you just follow the normal progression and move forward that way. But that's where that long-term planning comes in. And, you see, these tranches of money coming out from the government, a lot in arrears, but a lot way down the road. ARF equipment's a great example. Is we'll get a grant for ARF equipment that we won't get paid out for 3 years, because you don't get paid till you receive the equipment. So it's a really long, convoluted planning process, simply because there's so many different things tied into it. You have your environmental, you have, especially with the runway. And environmental has been changing a lot. So with your, are you getting something excluded? Is it not? Do you have to do a full evaluation? So you kind of plan, when you say it's a 5-year, you're planning for worst case. If you have to do a full environmental assessment on something, that could take a couple years. If you don't, it could take a couple months. So you don't want to be caught off guard. So that's, usually where you end up with such a long lead time for projects.
The approval, or the work that you're doing with the FAA that took you 2 years, was that simply to swap the runway over to the taxiway, to the parallel taxiway? Is there a funding element to that from the FAA as well, or is that separate?
It's all kind of mixed in together. It's what's your proposed process, what's your basically means and methods. Hey, we did this last time this way, we'd like to do it again this way, but over 20 years things change. Rules change, regulations change, processes, everything changes. So they just reevaluate everything. And through that reevaluation process, it validates your means and methods, which then leads to the approval. If you're getting the approval, then you have, the opportunity to get the grant money. So it's all kind of the lockstep process of it. Because if you don't have the FAA buy-in, you're definitely not going to have an opportunity for FAA grant money.
Interesting. Okay, so that leads me then to the next kind of series of questions, which is, as much as you can share. I don't mean to pull anything out from a funding perspective, but is it public information how much like the runway reconstruction will be, and then how do you break down like how that's funded, and where do those funding sources come from?
Once everything's all done, so we're going through the design process now. So once you get about your 30% design, you get a rough order of magnitude for your costs, and then it'll get more locked in. But something like that, 70 to 100 million would probably be what we're looking for. From a funding, we're all self-funded, no taxes. Florida is a good place to be an airport compared to some of the other states, because the state is very helps the airports a lot with FDOT, Florida Department of Transportation, funding from the aviation aspect. Not all states have the same amount of money that Florida gets, which is very helpful. So from a funding standpoint, you'll get FAA grants, you'll get FDOT grants, and then you'll have a portion remaining from the airport that we'll be on the hook for.
And on the hook is issued bonds. How do you? What kind of typically? How is that financed?
It could be PFCs. It could be from just non-aeronautical revenue that we're bringing in. Are we going to save money from our concessions or our parking, our land rents? I don't think we'll be doing bonds with that one because we're leaving that off to the side. I mean, we have lines of credit, so it'll be in part PFCs, and that's kind of the interesting thing about PFCs, the passenger facility charge. When you're using those, you gotta kind of ask the FAA, hey, I'm telling you, and I want to, and can I utilize these PFCs in the following method for the following things, and they'll give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But then that locks in those numbers, those forecasted numbers for years to come. So you can move those around. So it's a delicate balance. When it comes to funding, because you have discretionary, non-discretionary funds that the FAA is going to be allocating things, and I'm looking at Garrett. Garrett's going to have to go back and look at what those words mean. But it's
I'm taking notes.
I'm taking notes. Darn it, I got to start over.
Yeah.
But there's no real cut and dry kind of formula, which also makes it exciting. And the flip side too is you're also budgeting funds that you don't have yet, 3 years out, 5 years out. So it's a lot of forecasting and pinching pennies.
And so, so big round numbers, $100 million. You've got so much that's through the FAA grant. You've got the FDOT grants. And then the remainder is almost kind of covered by cash flow. Is that kind of so? Yeah. So this is kind of cash on. I'm assuming the construction company, doesn't offer necessarily a payment plan, but they want their money when they're done. So are these funds that are set aside up front, or how is that handled?
So everything's kind of pay as you go. So the work that's done this month will pay for the next month. Everything will get validated and reviewed, and that's the fun part about grant funds. Either on the state or federal level, is you got to review the heck out of everything, and everybody's eyes are looking on it because there's a lot of stuff going on, and you really have to be a good steward of those funds.
Lee County Port Authority, right? It's multiple airports, correct?
Correct.
So how many airports do you have? Are you basically managing?
We have two. We have RSW, which is Southwest Florida International Airport, and then we have Pagefield, which is FMY. Pagefield is the original airport out here. Started as a military training airport. It's down probably as a crow flies, a whole 5 miles in the air out by the river. And that is our GA reliever airport. We own the FBO out there. There's one FBO there, base operations. So it's a very well it's a really good asset and very it's very busy. It's one of those things where you would drive by and not really recognize it's there, but from an economic impact, it's probably doing $500 million a year of direct economic impact to the county.
Yeah.
Our RSW will do, what is it, right around 8.5, 9 billion in economic impact. So, when you look at a nice little small GA airport and a medium hub airport, the economic impacts that they have, but it's a nice asset, that really plays a huge benefit to the community, especially in the proximity that they are to the barrier islands, and when something bad happens, that's a launching point to get those evacuations and things of that nature that you hope you never need, off and running, even though it's not that far away at RSW. That distance, really comes in handy when you're a little bit closer.
Yeah. So obviously you're serving two very different markets, right? So how do you wear those different hats, right? Ultimately, if you're overseeing both, like, how do you handle that to be able to, because I'm sure the consumer demands are different from either side. Probably the neighboring demands are also very different as well, right? So how do you handle all that to make sure that you're meeting everybody's requirements or demands?
Well, we kind of run three distinct lines of business. So we have our commercial service airport, we have our general aviation airport, again, Pagefield, and then we have base operations, the FBO there. And the FBO there is its own, has its own marketing, person. They'll go out to all of the NBA or, all the big conferences to liaison with the fractionals or the companies doing that sort of aviation. They'll reach out to the other airports, to the GA community, and really tout and extol the virtues of our FBO versus any of the other ones at the surrounding airports. And then you have the airport itself with the hangars and the tie downs and the flight schools that runs that separate line of business. And the interesting dynamic that we face down here is RSW does not have tie downs. We have one FBO there. Excuse me. So the next closest airports are either up north about 45 minutes or down south by about 45 minutes. So there's a wait list for hangar space. There's a wait list for tie downs. Because a lot of people will come down in season, bring their airplanes with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not a problem I have. But a lot of people do. So, we're there to help that. But I think it's worked really well being able to market the FBO as a standalone entity, to create that name brand. And it is challenging because people will say Fort Myers and this airport will pop up first. Or it might be the Naples airport when the people want to go, closer to where Pagefield is, because, at the end of the day, the dispatchers aren't always, finding the most logical location. It might be the first location that pops up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is Naples kind of like your top competitor in that regards in the GA?
I don't know if we would be competitors. I think the markets are vastly different.
Fair enough.
We're doing, their traffic is more on par with what we're doing at RSW from an operations per day. And they just have a different clientele down there. With Naples, into, Marco Island south and a little bit north, whereas Pagefield just has, Captiva, Sanibel. Some people from Naples have realized that the airport's there and it's easy to get to. But by and large, it's a vastly different clientele. From a perspective, they'll do probably close to 13 million gallons of fuel, and we'll do maybe 2.5, 3. It's one of those. We're happy to be serving our nice, our community, but they're vastly different beasts down there.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. So from the, I guess the commercial operations, right? Do you guys typically, like, how do you reach out to airlines, right? Do airlines come to you and say, hey, look, either they're already flying there, they want more slots, they want more service, or they, somebody's trying to go into the airport, do they reach out to you, or do you guys have to kind of continually go out to airlines, be like, hey, look, here's all the great things we have to offer. You guys should definitely come here to us because your passengers are going to love it, right? So how do you guys view that?
For us, I think it's kind of a 3, maybe 4-prong approach. We want to keep what we have. We want to grow frequency for the markets we're serving, and then we want to grow new frequency. So it kind of sounds, keeping what you have. It's the dynamics of the airlines have changed. The out and backs versus hub to hub has changed. It kind of ebbs and flows year to year, especially depending on the airline. You have your more institutional airlines that will go over their hub versus some of the other with the flexibility to go point to point. If we can keep those point to points, that's more passenger traffic into here. The other side of that is our international. So we're always out looking for international, but nonetheless, regardless if it's domestic or international, we work a lot with our properties and our air service development counterparts at the airlines. So we have 2 people that do air service development that their sole purpose in life is, again, maintaining what we have, growing existing, and bringing in new. And it's a very long lead time because the airlines know who you are, what you are. They have all the credit card demographics and the spend and how much everybody's worth that's flying and your catchment areas and all of that information. They know that stuff. It just becomes, when does it become profitable for them to do that? For us, we are close to the Caribbean. We are close to, Canada, or not Canada, to Mexico. So how do you pick up somebody coming from Rhode Island, stopping here, going on to Mexico, or going into the Caribbean somewhere? How do we become an intermediary stop? So we look for those opportunities. We look for, how do we build our growth into Germany? How do we bring back our flights into Canada? So, with everything going on this past year, we have a large amount of Canadians, a lot drive, but then a lot coming. It's cold up there right now, and they're getting a lot of snow. So, the downside is they would take an airplane coming in here, in a half hour beyond here, you're on, the other side of the Gulf in Mexico, or, half hour south of here, you're in the Caribbean or the Bahamas. So it's really trying to maintain those relationships with your air service development counterparts at the airlines and making sure you're leveraged. We also have incentive money. If you're a new market, there's money that we can provide for marketing, which goes a long way as well. Rent credits on landing fees, things of that nature for new entrants. But it's no different than any other airline or any other airport. So it's just making sure that when the time comes, you're ready to welcome those new people in. I think that's part and parcel to why we're building 14 gates. Is we have the want to by airlines. And the way to do that is, getting those new gates, because we don't have the space for it right now. Mm-hmm. When you look at it turns per gate, some concourses do better than others, much like any other airline. Our problem is if you're going over a hub, you're 2 hours, 3 hours from every hub, just like every other airport in the country. So you need to hit that connectivity time versus going point to point here, RSW to New Haven as an example. You can take off or land whenever you want, come in open time instead of the busy time. But without those type of flights, it's just harder to do that. So that's really what we're out there pounding the pavement for.
Where are those 14 gates going?
They are going, if you're looking at the airport at the top, on the far right is B, in the middle is C, to the left is D, and then off of there is E. We're starting, and it's neat. It's literally twice as big as D. If you were to move D over and then add, double and a little bit, it's vastly different. It's really neat.
So it's west of D.
It is west of D. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There's new.
What happened
There's
to
A? A is not there yet, and the reason A is not there yet is there is all the cooling for the facility is next to D. So the chiller plants and all the infrastructure, the power feeds come in on that side. Cost would have been significantly more to have to bring it in to the other side when you can just add a couple cooling towers to the existing and have all of the cooling requirements that you need as well as power.
It's fascinating. So you're like, what is it, Tampa, where there's like the proverbial missing B. You're just the missing A.
No, the A is there, just not right now.
It used to be.
I won't say that joke. No.
Sorry.
Yeah. Man, you be creative with A, and there's a gap, but
sure.
Yeah, no, there A will be there. In the I don't know how long in the future, but you figure all of the existing concourses, you can put a head house on it, get about 4 or 5 more gates. So that's 15 gates there plus another concourse. So ultimate build out 65-ish gates. E is built, you can put another 5 gates at about a 45-degree angle, depending on what map you're looking on the grass. And there's a new taxi lane going in, actually taxiway going east-west. So there's a lot of pavement going in over there.
No. So for the additional 17 gates or 14, sorry. Excuse me. Well, how long of a process is that? Like when did you start it? When will that be ready to go?
Construction started about a year ago. It's a 3-year build, so it'll be right around a little over 3 years total construction. Design, again, it's probably add 4 or 5 years before that, probably more from a design standpoint. Yeah, because they just take forever to design and fund. But 3 years, a little over 3 years, start to finish. And I think it's really a tale of 2 very different projects. The project down for the consolidated checkpoint, that is work on an existing facility, redoing something while passengers are still moving. That will finish in about probably about 2.5 more years. So okay, they're going to build a whole concourse in the time frame that you'll have a checkpoint, redesigned and completed. And again, the telling part is a greenfield build where there's no impediments is vastly different than having to work in and around people.
So financing then of the terminal, which I assume is a little bit different from the runway. You had mentioned you were working on some bonds. I assume are these municipal?
Yes. So we were in the bond market about 2 years ago. We're going back out to New York probably in a month to sell the other set of bonds, about $850 million in bonds. We'll hit the market there probably late February, and then we'll be funded for that project for for the checkpoint consolidation, as well as one of our other projects we have ongoing.
How much of what you do involves, I mean, it doesn't sound like it's very often, but how much involves selling those bonds? And now we're really starting to cross over with a lot of the same people that Garrick and I work with on the aircraft side who talk about municipal bonds and, oh, we got Steve coming selling his bonds. And there's almost like this competition for capital. And how often are you, or how much expertise does this require of you?
Me personally, that's a loaded trick question. I will say when we go to bond market, we have, let's see, we have three banks helping us. We have legal times two. We have our financial company. So there's, our whole bond council is probably 7 or 8 different firms working, to get those sold. The nice thing about our bonds, or I think airport bonds as a whole, is they've been very favorable. I know last time we went out, we were oversubscribed quite substantially. We would expect the same thing to happen now. The big unknown for us, probably like any type of government type bond, is what's the market going to do. So we're projecting a little higher than probably what will actually the rates will be. We'll see what happens based on. I haven't looked a little bit. This morning was kind of ugly with the stock market, so We'll see where things are. Come a few weeks, but I think it's very similar to how other everybody else does everything. You got your banks and your bond council, and we won't do the dog and pony show as much. We'll do the bond rating agencies here next week. Not bond rating, the rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and Kroll next week. But that's part of our yearly meet and greet. And then if any institutions want to do the question and answer, we'll entertain that as well. But basically do whatever they would like, just to gain the information they need.
What was the last time you did those bonds?
Probably 2 years ago.
Can you talk a little bit about like the rates you expected, the coupon, like what you were able to achieve?
So I think this time we're looking all in at about 4.72, which is probably going to be, it's probably higher than what we'll get. I think last time we were about 4.5 all in. This one is also buying down about 34 million in bonds from 2015 that will save. I think what I'm using. Let's see. I think it was they try to, our CFO tries to save in good basis is about 3% on the refund. I think we'll get up closer to 10 to 15 depending on what the rates are. But wow. Just being able to refund, I think kudos to our finance department and our CFO. They've really gotten creative with just how they're doing everything right now. Because we do have the 2 projects and refinancing outstanding debt to save several $1 million in interest payments is never a bad position to be in.
No. Yeah.
You had mentioned your last was what, 4.5, and you're looking at 4.7, kind of targeting 4.72.
That's our high. We figure it'll be significantly lower, but just from a planning purposes, sure. We want to come in conservative. Because the market's a little bit, every day the market's different. So,
I guess we're getting on in years now, but had interest rate, by the time you had closed on the prior bonds, had interest rates already risen to similar levels, or was this before that?
Okay. No, so 2 years ago, they weren't, they were pretty similar.
Okay.
Not quite where they are now, but we would expect them to be in line, that 4 or 5. Again, we come in high with all the assumptions and the forecast, because we don't want to, be caught off guard with something that we didn't look at, because for us is we have to get approval from our board to be able to go and seek the bond. So there's a whole process we go through. So we need to make sure that, we'll ask, for more, not ask for more. We'll have a higher level of max versus what we need just based on the fluctuation of the interest.
And then how? I mean, look, one of the major kind of risk points. I don't know if that's the right term, but the hurricane that really hit Fort Myers hard. I forget the name of it. I'll just call it Hurricane Garrick.
Nice. Thanks.
But truly, I mean, it hit Sanibel Island. It took down bridges. It really hit the Fort Myers area hard. Now that has happened, I'm fairly certain, in between the two bond rounds. Does that affect your ability to raise, or is there any pushback that you get in terms of risk on those part? Or if there is some sort of natural disaster like that, are there other avenues of funding that come in to almost backstop something like that? How does that work?
So I think when you ask that question, you ask that in the totality of the U.S. So if you're in California, you have earthquakes, and if you're in the Midwest, you have tornadoes or snow. If you're on the East Coast, you have those ice storms or snow as well. And for us, we had hurricanes in between, and your traffic ebbs and flows. But with our agreements that we have with the airlines, they have a debt coverage ratio that they guarantee for us. So the bonds usually want about 1.25 debt coverage ratio. We actually maintain about a 1.45 to 1.47, and the airlines back us to 1.4. So even if something would happen, the airlines got our backs through our contract use agreement. So even the other side is with the ebbs and flows. There's requirements for how many days cash on hand, and all those other factors that go into things. All of our other sources of revenue. So we're in a really good spot from that aspect. But the COVID, I think, was an eye opener. Luckily we got help, much like a lot of the other airports. But it was also how were we strategic during those times with bringing down our debt and things of that nature.
Yeah, which is a very different natural disaster as well that hits everything all at once. And Florida, as in general, just weathered COVID better than really anywhere else in the world. For that period.
Well, it didn't exist in Florida, right?
No, it didn't.
Didn't go down that far. What's the typical maturity for the bonds? Right? What's the timeline?
So we do it. So we have. I think it falls into 3 series. And we did that. Typically, we do start repayment at 10 with a 30-year maturity. But one of them is, I don't remember, is it 5 years? I think one of them is 5 years. Our goal is, figuring out with the issues we had at our checkpoint expansion project, hopefully getting some money back on that. But that's a big unknown, kind of if and when that will all shake out, because we'll need to finish that project and then go to mediation to talk about that. But we're set up. I think they're fairly typical. It's a 10-year and then with 30.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I want to know what's the hardest part of what you do. So like, what of the different groups that you work with, you're sitting in this not weird, but this interesting spot where you deal with the airlines, you deal with the local municipality, I guess, the local politics almost, as it were. You're dealing with state and FAA separately. You're dealing with your staff and operations, and you're also dealing with Wall Street, from time to time. Which of those, and you cannot say all the above, but which of those just takes the most attention and the most time? Or are there something that I'm forgetting as well? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you can say one always takes the most amount of time. And I'm gonna say all of them, but in a different way without saying all of them, because every day is so vastly different. Last night we had our baggage system went out. We have redundancy, and on the west side a motor went out, and then on the east side a belt popped. You wouldn't think that's a big deal, but you also wouldn't think those things would happen at the same time. So in that instance, that was the most important thing. A commissioner might call. You might have the news, being news-ish, and you might have employee changes. Yeah, I think that's one of the neat things about this is it's very dynamic, and there are so many moving parts. There's not a lot of organizations where you're moving 14 million passengers a year, but you're also doing $1 billion of construction, but you're also a property owner, but you're also running food and beverage and retail, and then you're doing not a lot, some other, you're running a parking garage, and then you have roadways, you have a police department and a fire department, and all these different things that really allow you to have, I guess that I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to go do this, and then, if it's really bad, go for a drive around the airport, look at airplanes. So every day it is truly something different, and I think that's one of the great appeals of kind of what I do.
Like Mayor Steve, got in a little city there, right?
Yeah.
Mayor Steve.
And then, okay, so the baggage issue. So you lost a motor and tossed a belt in 2 separate concourses. Who complains to you when that happens? I don't mean that, I don't mean who tells you about the problem. What I'm saying is it the airlines? Is it the news? Is it a call from the commissioner? What is it that creates that pain point?
Not a pain point, because we have processes in place to fix it. But if you didn't have those processes, you didn't take the time to look through all of how you operate on what day is today? Today's Tuesday. I guess that would have been Monday. On a holiday Monday, without knowing what you need to have stock on hand, then it could snowball into a big issue. Being shut down for a half hour to change a motor on a belt. It seems like a big deal, but it's just one of those things where if you don't have the process in place, that's when it snowballs, and because it becomes impactful. And it's kind of the Wizard of Oz. What's behind the great curtain is if you can figure out how to mitigate, plan, and fix before it seeps through to the front of house. Then even though you see an issue on the backside, it doesn't affect anybody on the front side.
In this analogy, the great curtain's the little rubber things that the bags come through, right?
Yeah, it's the little. Yes,
that's the great curtain.
That's the great curtain.
Really, what I'm getting to is, look, is it the airline? So let's say that you didn't have the process in place and it failed for a day. Is it the airlines that call and say, "Whoa, wait, what's going on? I need relief on my side somehow"? Is it the city? Is it? I mean, obviously, the passengers are not going to be all that excited about it.
We would step up. We have protocols in place. We'd step up. We'd help move bags. There's other things that, from a security standpoint, that we would do with the TSA, with our own internal staff, that we would get those bags moved. It becomes a more labor-intensive process, but again, it's through contingency planning, through talking. Because things go out, TSA machines stop, belts stop, you have to adjust. I mean, that's been every airport I've ever been at. But you just have to have the procedures in place, and it might slow things down, and airlines might take a delay, but, at the end of the day, you got everybody, kind of just figuratively and literally moving bags.
Is there any recourse is not the right word, but it's the only one that I have. But is there anything with the airlines where they can be like, "Hey, you didn't provide the service to our level and their penalty? I don't, not to get into contractual negotiations here, but what is there? Are there any back and forth with the airline? Something that we might see on the passenger side, or is this mostly just municipal? Hey, look, we're doing what we're doing, and we're doing our best, and our job's to avoid. But
Well, I think each airport's different in who owns the infrastructure. Depending on how you're set up. Some large
Sure.
hub airports have a dominant carrier, and they own the building and or the infrastructure in it. Some own, the airports own the infrastructure. I think that the curious thing about airports is people don't really realize how hands off the airport is in how things work. You figure there's probably 4 to 7 touch points of a passenger between the time they get on property to they're in their butt in the seat. And of those 4 to 7, the airport drives maybe 2. You're driving up, or dropping off, or you're taking a bus. That may be 1. You're dropping off a bag at a ticket counter. That's an airline. That's not airport. Yep. You're standing in a TSA line. That's TSA. That's not the airport. You're going to the bathroom that week. You want to have a clean bathroom, so that if you're choosing that, you're going to a concession. That's a concession, so that's a third party, and then you're getting on an airplane. So of those touch points, you got the road and your bathroom, and hopefully your floor is clean. All those others are driven by somebody else. So when you're looking at driving a KPI, driving a metric, driving on-time performance, you're trying to drive a bag to bag carousel after you've arrived. You don't have a lot that you can do. You can provide the space. You can provide access to making sure that your equipment is up and running if you're using common use equipment, or your flow of passengers is clear, or equipment. But outside of that, it's very much the onus is on your partners.
okay, which then brings up the next question: how do you sell to new? Right, like you talked about the air service development and the type of work that you do there, but what's aside from the reality that the real estate happens to be nearly beachfront property, in a fast-growing Southwest Florida area, how do you differentiate to the people you ultimately want to convince to either operate or fly out of RSW? What are the areas of differentiation that you tend to offer? Sell me, Steve.
Are you talking airlines coming in, or what are you?
I don't know. Let's talk airlines. Whatever matters to you most. Like what type of persuasive? Who do you need to persuade that would most impact or most benefit the airport? Air service development is an easy one, right? You get more. You convince an airline to drop an airplane in there, and then PFCs and parking and all that stuff. But maybe there's something else.
I think from an enticement of the airlines, it's what's their revenue per seat, how much they make it. So if they're making more money to come into here, then they're going to put more seats into a market. If there's more requests, they're going to put more seats. It's what's the yield you're getting. From what entices somebody to come here versus going to Fort Lauderdale, again, it's that customer driven. The quirkiness about the FAA is I have to provide space, and the airlines or the FBOs or whomever wants to do business, it's up to them to determine the level of competition. So if I have space, I have to welcome whoever wants to fly to New York. And if that's 6 different airlines and they can all make it work because they're all making money, then that's it. I think for here, especially after the hurricanes, our numbers dipped. Then people went elsewhere. Now that we're seeing the locations come back, the people who used to come here are coming back as well. But the people who grew up going to I don't know, Fort Lauderdale might not be as likely to come over here because they grew up going to Fort Lauderdale, and Fort Lauderdale is their sense of place, or to Destin or Fort Walton or wherever, the Outer Banks. That's just kind of their place. So for here, as we grow, it's what's the secondary pull? Secondary pull is in about 3 weeks, we're going to start spring training. There's a place called Boston that I hear gets cold this time of year, and a place called Minnesota, more specifically Minneapolis. And both, I believe, are rather cold. And Florida has March, April, probably 70s, 80 degrees. Our nights do get cold. They'll get down into like the high 50s, low 60s. And that draw is all those people who want to get out of their basements and come see some baseball. So that's the draw. So when you look at, the folks from the Midwest, you look at the folks from the Northeast, where are our primary markets? And depending on season, they change. Pretty soon it'll be Minneapolis, Ohio, and then all regions around Boston become our top 5 markets because it's the top 5 coldest places. So that's really the intrinsic draw, is what's your connectivity? What's, where can I go? That's US based. That's quick. You want to fly 2 hours and sit at the beach. We've got that for you.
So when you think about the consumers, right? The passengers that are coming in, how much, well, actually 2 questions. One, when you look at the concessions, stores, whatever you've got, right? Is that something that basically you guys choose, and that's what you allow to have come in to the airport? Or is that driven by the airlines or somebody else that say, hey, look, no, we want to have these places in here, and then it comes down to just contractual negotiations of like, yeah, here's what we're willing to do for you. And then to the other part of that, like, how much do you look at the demographic of the passengers that are coming in to be able to tailor to that, right? Because you were talking about Canadians coming in. So is that something that you look into that and go, hey, you know what? It'd be nice to have something that we do here that when they come here, they're like, hey, you know what? I know this, or I'm familiar with this. And so they feel comfortable coming into the airport because then it's not just all stuff that they just don't know, right? So how much of that plays? So it's kind of two different questions.
So so the airport dictates kind of what you want, and part of it is that sense of place, sense of feel, what's local to the market. Things like if you're out, if you're out in the community, you might see a restaurant, you come to the airport, like, oh, I remember that from the beach. So we have that as well as some national brands. So you'll have Chick-fil-A and Starbucks, but you'll also have a downtown House of Pizza, as an example. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily that those are the ones that would come in, but you'll have that sense of local and national. The other side to that is we opened a store. It's a retail, waters. It's a quick sale. Little bags of candy, magazines type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Called Relay, and it's big in Europe. We did that, and we positioned that next to our international flights because the brand recognition is there. We know that they're in the majority of the European markets. So instead of saying, oh, we'll call it a Hudson News, they might not know Hudson News, but they'll see Relay. It might be the same company, it might not, and they'll know what that is.
Yeah.
So we try to do a little bit of both. The one thing that's going to be vastly different here is with the addition of about 200,000 square feet in our centralized checkpoint that will include food, beverage, and retail, and everything else. The 3 checkpoints opening up, our food and beverage is going to be vastly different, and you can walk. Whereas before, we had talked about you're kind of stuck where you're at. This isn't a large airport, so if you want to walk 2 or 3 minutes to get a glass of wine, and somebody wants a taco, and somebody wants Chick-fil-A, and you all meet in the corner and in your food court and have a nice very different meal amongst the people at the table, you'll have that ability to do so. So the goal is to try and reach as much variety as you can without really saturating, but it has to be thoughtful. Because when you look at the demographics, one of the items was, do we want chicken wings? I like chicken wings, but if you're going to put chicken wings in without a place to sit down and eat said chicken wings, then you're just creating a mess. So if you're creating a mess, who's going to eat your chicken wings? Now, chicken wings, again, I love chicken wings, but I'm not going to grab chicken wings and then take them to a gatehold area and try to eat chicken wings. Now, if that was placed in a food court, that might be a different conversation.
You clearly have not been the guy to sit next to me on an airplane and whip out a big old thing of chicken wings.
Yeah, that and the fish.
Yeah.
Been next to that guy. But those are the type of things where you kind of get that granular, like, I would love chicken wings. This would be great, but chicken wings and your Parmesan fries right here is not what I need. So it's kind of interesting, the breakout. And a lot of it, too, is we know we are not a large hub airport. And we know that we'll have 20, 30,000 people traverse, in any given day, plus some employees. But we're still kind of stuck with what that local flavor is, and you don't want to get too extravagant because you still want to make money.
So actually, how do you handle airline lounges, right? Because that's becoming a bigger thing, right? Because obviously that's to get to the to satisfy the premium customers, right? Airlines are pushing for that. So being a smaller airport, right? How do you handle that? Do you have? Because I'm sure everybody's probably asking you, we want space to be able to do this for our customers. So how do you answer that, right?
So right now we have we've signed an agreement for Delta as part of our growth. We have space for a common use lounge, and then we have another airline potentially looking at adding a club. It becomes, we actually just had this conversation this morning. How much do you devalue your food and beverage if you the more clubs you have? Mm-hmm. So my comment was, right now we don't have any clubs, and our goal in theory is to have one airline and one common use. We might end up with two airline in the common use, but everybody is siloed into their concourse. That's how we operate today. When you open all that up and you have all this space, all of these options, plus clubs, do the norms of business still apply? So if the norms, making numbers up here, if the norm of business is, if you open a club up, 20% of your food beverage drops in that area because of the club, is that still valid when everything is brand new? You're not placing something into it because those people have never had that opportunity to buy anything, because it might have been, I've got one sit down and a Starbucks, and I don't like Starbucks and I don't want to sit down, so I'm going to go to the Relay and grab a package of donuts and a bottle of water. So now that bottle of water donut person, if I have a Chick-fil-A, are they going to spend $10 on Chick-fil-A and still get a bottle of water for the airplane? So until we can validate what our demographics are, validate what our credit card holder, population is, validate the difference between, all right, you're with this airline loyalty program, but you have this credit card, so you take them out, and that leaves you with how many people with, an airline lounge credit card, eligible type of thing. What does that number look like? Are you making money? So that we're trying to really wrap our heads around that, because you don't want to saturate. You don't want to devalue your concessions, because there's a lot of money that goes into the leasehold improvements. So if you're going to, a couple $1,000s a square foot for leasehold improvements at an airport, you want to get your money back. So we're trying to figure that out right now. So is too many 2? Is too many 3? Do we need to wait to open up a common use one or a second airline one? You know, that's all to be determined. But those are a lot of the factors that we're trying to math out. Is
Yeah.
outside of the norm, how does that shake out with somebody that isn't operating the norm?
Yeah,
So
it's
you're
really interesting.
charging rent to the airline for an airline, right? So they're paying for the space, but the concern is that you're losing concessions because people can now use the lounge. And so I assume you're getting pushback from the concessions directly, or how does that?
No, but you don't want, at the end of the day, so you get rent from terminal rent, and then you get a percentage of sales.
Sure.
And alcohol is different than coffee, is different than retail, is different than food. And it becomes really a math problem. So, and some guesstimates. So if, again, the four of us are traveling and only one of us has a card to get into the Delta Lounge, but you can bring a guest, is that other person going to really spend a whole bunch of money on food, or are they just going to get, or are you, is that person more apt to just get a bottle of water and go away? So the unknown to us is when you introduce a Vino Volo, a nice place to get a wine, or a Chick-fil-A, or a place to get some pot stickers or a smoothie, things that weren't here before. What's that going to entice people to do? So you have the metrics at an airport where all those things exist, and then you put a lounge on top of it, how it deteriorates. But if you don't have that, how does that fluctuate? Because is the person going to the Delta Lounge who's in first class really going to buy a smoothie or a Chick-fil-A sandwich, or are they, would they rather say, hey, I'm going to, be in first class here in 20 minutes, and then I'll be in Atlanta, and I know that there's 5 lounges right there that I can go to and I can eat there. So we don't know what the customer sentiment or flow will be yet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, you would think with with some of the lounges, right? You're getting that's typically the premium traffic that'll go to the lounges, right? So then, are you losing their ability to spend more money at the airport because they, if it's not there, right? They'll still have the ability to spend versus just going to the lounge, and for them it's quote unquote free. But that's really interesting, all that stuff. Wow.
Our studies show that overall we don't have enough space for food and beverage. People want to have a drink on their way out of vacation. We don't have enough space. But we think we have a program now. But again, is it too much? Is it not enough? It's Goldilocks and who has the right porridge.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, Steve. Well, look, it's been talking about an hour and a half. It's been going, it goes really fast, which is usually a good sign that it was really cool. But this has definitely been like really, really fun. I mean, it's you're dealing in a side that I think is very different from what all of us here do. But it's also part of the aviation ecosystem, right? And it's a very important part of it. So it's really cool. So thanks for taking the time to chat with us today. It's always good to see you as well and chat with you. So thanks.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. And don't forget, when you're all cold and tired, it's warm and glorious down here in Southwest Florida.
I'll hate you that much more.
There you go. Yes. Don't hate. Come and visit.
So
that's hilarious.
Feeling great about myself.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you could have. Well, she could have done so much better. Apparently,
She could have.